how do you feel about giving the sermon for Yisker? And she said, bad. She said, I don't feel right. I said, you don't feel like you're entitled to give the sermon? Yes, I do not feel that I am entitled. Can I ask you something? She said, yes. I said, are your parents alive? And she said, uh-huh. I said, okay. I said, so maybe, I'm just guessing, that part of the reason you don't feel entitled to give the sermon for Yisker is because your parents are alive. And she said, yes, that's it. That's it. And I said, okay, I get it. I really, really get it. I said, have you ever lost anyone who you loved dearly? She thought. She said, of course. I lost my mentor. My mentor died, and I loved him dearly. He was wonderful. I said, well, when did that happen? She said, 11 months ago. I said, so do you think you could write a sermon feeling what you feel for that loss and share that with your congregation? And she got all choked up. And I said, I think you could, don't you? And she said, yeah. She went on to write such a beautiful sermon. It was so incredibly moving.
Wow, you really are the Rabbi Whisperer.
Michelle Lowe is a former advertising executive, a Broadway playwright whose work has been produced in theaters around the globe. And most recently, she was dubbed the Rabbi Whisperer by the New York Times for her work helping rabbis find their voice and make an impact with her high-stakes, high-holiday speaking.
My job is to help a rabbi find their voice and project it out into the universe, to their congregation, out from their heart, and move some people.
It all started back in 2015, when Michelle watched a young rabbi at a Reformed temple in Westchester struggle nervously through her sermon. Michelle reached out and offered her stage experience to help the rabbi better connect with her congregation through speaking.
You got to stand up, claim the space, look out, look into the faces of your congregants, really look at them when you can, and talk to them.
That night, the reviews came in and they were nothing less than extraordinary.
I got a text from her saying, I get choked up even thinking about this. She said, I cannot tell you what a difference it made. That even my colleagues came up to me afterwards and the congregants came up and I'm reading this and I'm like, oh my goodness, I never expected this kind of an impact. And that was it. Never thought, Daniel, I never thought in my wildest dreams, never thought I'd ever do it again. It was just a one shot.
But as the saying goes, talent finds work and work finds talent. Fast forward to this year, Michelle is working on 37 high holiday sermons for roughly 24 rabbis looking to find their authentic voice, craft meaningful sermons, and create unbreakable bonds with their congregations.
At the beginning of every, session, I'll say, how do you feel about this? And they'll say, oh, you know what? The last third. And I was like, yeah, I'll say to them, yeah, that last third. What do we got? We need to look at that. Let's look at the flow.
But the high holidays this year present a unique challenge as the ongoing war in Israel, with all its complexities, weighs heavily on everyone's minds.
It's just more complicated this year. You're going to have generations of Jewish families sitting in their sanctuaries, and the grandmother is not talking to her college-age grandchild, and vice versa. And it's a very tough time.
I'm grateful to Michelle for taking time out to talk with me, given the demands of what is undoubtedly her busiest professional season.
I tell my rabbis, if you just give yourself the time, and you give me a little time too, it's amazing what you can unlock.
So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with playwright and coach Michelle Lowe.
So I found out about you last year, I guess, from the New York Times article, which was really exciting for you, I'm sure. About 15 people forwarded it to me.
Seriously, good. Thank you.
Yeah, because I'm a sermon geek myself, and I love this stuff. And it said that back in 2015, you were watching a young rabbi, kind of twiddle with her hair and fidget nervously, and you decided to step up and say something. And what led up to that?
So I'm a playwright, and I've been a playwright for many years. I've had a very lovely career, and my work's been done all over the world. Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theaters. And so I've been in enough rehearsal rooms where I saw that when you feel someone up there who isn't connecting, for me, it was when you see an actor up there who isn't connecting. But it's the same thing when you see a young rabbi up in front of a congregation and you can see that she's shy. She knows she's not connecting with the congregation. She wants to connect with the congregation, but just doesn't have the tools yet to do that. And I really felt for her. So I reached out to the senior rabbi. This was at Westchester Reformed Temple. I talked to Rabbi Blake, Jonathan Blake, afterwards. And I said, listen, if there's anything I can help with, I'd love to speak with this rabbi, if maybe coach her a little bit. I'd never done anything like this before, but I've been in enough rehearsal rooms 20 years. I think I could help. And he said, she'll never go for it. I'm not even going to say. And I said, okay, fine. That's okay. I just thought, really, it was in the moment. It was one of those serendipitous things that I thought I would just offer. The next day I'm driving and I get a call from Jonathan, and he said, I spoke to her and she wants to do it. And I was shocked because I thought, oh no, it's not going to happen. And so I said, great, can you connect us? So we connected over email, and I said, give me 2 hours with you. First hour, let's meet, let's talk. Let me get to know you, what's important to you. I said, and then book the second hour in your sanctuary because let's work. And she said, great, okay, did it. We met for this coffee. And as she walked in, I could see she was waving these pages, and she sat down, we said hello, and I said, what are those? She said, oh, that's my sermon for tonight. You're going to help me with that too, right? And I said, sure, of course. Not thinking. I just thought we were there to talk about her presence, how she embodied what she was saying, how she could connect. But she also wanted some help with her sermon. And this had been several weeks after I'd originally seen her on the Bima. So I talked to her, learned what was important to her. I said, did you make me a copy? Yes. So I said, okay, let's go. So we each got in our cars, we drove down. So I sat in the pews, and I was editing and changing while I said to her, you got to stand up, claim the space, look out, look into the faces of your congregants, really look at them when you can, and talk to them. Talk to them. Don't think about what else is going around or what else is about you. Just talk. And she did it. And there was a little pushback when I said, I want you to try this with your hair. And she's like, And I said, oh, just come on, give me a half pony. And she stopped fiddling with her hair. But more important, I could see she was really trying to reach me. And I was just one person. So after an hour, in walked the cantor with a whole bunch of little kids, and it was time. I said, okay, there you go. You're all set. Let me know how it goes. So that Friday night, I got a text from her saying, I get choked up even thinking about this. She said, I cannot tell you what a difference it made. That even my colleagues came up to me afterwards, and the congregants came up, and I'm reading this, and I'm like, are you kidding? Oh my goodness. I never expected this kind of an impact. And it was just one person, and it was enough. And I said, okay, great. What a great experience. I'm really glad I did that. And I'm really glad she's happy. And that was it. Never thought, Daniel, I never thought in my wildest dreams, never thought I'd ever do it again. It was just a one shot. But Jonathan got back in touch with me and said, listen, we got the high holidays coming up, and I'd like you to coach 2 of the rabbis other than him. And he said, and I'll pay you. I said to myself, he's going to pay me? Oh my gosh. Okay. So that happened. And I worked with 2 rabbis that high holidays. And then I realized as the holidays came around the next year, I thought, I want to do more of this. I really love doing this. I love helping them. And a lot of the things that we had talked about and I had learned about them, I felt like I could help them. So the next year, I said, well, how am I going to reach more rabbis? And I went into LinkedIn and I typed the word rabbi. And up came not as many as I thought. I think there'd be dozens and well, not every rabbi has a LinkedIn profile in 2016, 2017, right? And even now. So I typed in and I wrote cold messages. Cold meaning I just did it on I didn't know these rabbis. I said, here I am. I'm a playwright. I've worked with some rabbis. I'd love to work with you if you ever want to talk. Nobody got back to me except one rabbi in Boston. And she said to me, my senior rabbi does not allow me to speak during the high holy days. And I thought, oh my gosh. She said, but if I ever get the chance, I would love to work with you. And I wrote her back and I said, so does the rabbi, your senior, do all four big sermons? She wrote me back. She said, yes. I said, you get in touch with me. I would love to work with you. A year goes by and I pick up a little bit more work, just a couple. But the next year, the word was starting to get out and people were starting to recommend me. And I loved it. And that rabbi from Boston got back to me and said, the senior rabbi's leaving the congregation. I'm up for the position of senior rabbi. Will you help me? And I said, you got it. We went to work and she did 2 sermons her first time up for the high holy days. And from that, people have been very kind and it's mostly word of mouth. Yes, the article has helped and this recent piece in Jewish Telegraphic Agency, JTA. And little by little, I now coach across the country and I work with the most incredible rabbis. I work with senior rabbis, associate rabbis, and I now work with rabbis all year round. Because at this point, if you're going to work with me, it really needs, what I've learned is it really helps to have the full year before. Some of the rabbis I work with have been grandfathered in and they just work with me for a certain time. But I feel really lucky to do this work and grateful.
Wow, that is amazing. So let's unpack some of that.
Yeah, of course. Wow.
So the first rabbi, was she, I was going to ask you if you had a relationship with her before you met with her. It sounds like you didn't.
I did.
Yeah. So was she open to it? Did she take it as maybe a little bit of an affront that she needed help?
Yes, I think she did. And it actually mirrors a lot of the work that I do now with rabbis that I don't know. In other words, people who recommend a rabbi to get in touch with me. The first time we talk, I'll do a consultation. I need to hear about them. Frequently, I'll say, what made you become a rabbi? Tell me about your life. Tell me how you're getting, tell me about your congregation. Just little bits so I can understand where they're coming from. Just little bits so I can understand where they're coming from. Because what I've learned is a congregation in Miami is very different from a congregation in Los Angeles, which is very different from a congregation in Atlanta or Boston or New York. And you are speaking to your congregation if you're a rabbi. And that comes so much into play with what you're going to say. Yeah.
And it's interesting to me because rabbis are expected to be kind of a jack of all trades. And what job requires you to be a master at so many different types of things, pastoral work, community outreach, speaking, like it's just, and you just can't master them all. And
I think there is an expectation on the part of many congregants that you should know all this stuff. You should know the history. You should know the laws. You should, and by the way, you should be a really good preacher in the meantime. It's a lot. I've learned so much about the role of a rabbi and the personal that goes into being a rabbi. And it's mind-blowing. So I really feel for them. And I hope that me helping a little bit takes some of the pressure off. In some Reform, rabbis have only had 1 semester of homiletics. That's it in 5 years. And so there is this expectation. Most congregants don't know that. So there is also an expectation on a young rabbi who comes in as an assistant associate with, okay, let's go. Let's hear what you got.
Show us what you got. Yeah.
And what I've had the most part of what's been so wonderful about working with rabbis over years has been watching these young rabbis or these associate rabbis come in and growing their writing, watching them grow so much and their preaching style. Because not only do I help them write the sermon, but I also ask them if they can arrange for me doing a rehearsal with them. Because I think rehearsing is just as important as the writing, because it's the second part. It's that connection, right? You can write a great sermon, but if your head's down the whole time while you're giving it, your congregation's never going to connect with you.
Yeah.
Because they're going to tune out. They might as well be listening to the radio.
Yeah, or just email them your speech.
Yeah, right. And very frequently when I'll meet a new rabbi, a young rabbi, they don't see the difference between an essay and a sermon, right? And there's such a difference, which is why very often in my coaching, after we get the writing done, and we'll talk more if you like about the beginnings, but at a certain point, I'll start reading them their sermon. And that can be a really mind-blowing experience because they start to hear it's different when you say it out loud. So what sounded really good in your mind on the page doesn't always translate to what you're going to say. And what you say is just as important as what you've written.
Yeah. I find it so fascinating that you were brought in kind of like as a, Batwoman or Batgirl, to help with the connection part.
Yeah.
And it seems to have branched out into the writing, but in terms of the ratio, what do you think is most important, or where do you think that you are mostly able to help, or is it equal?
I think it's equal. I think we spend more time on the writing because just by the nature of how long the writing takes, that it's a process. And I think that rabbis that I work with are getting used to the idea that it's a process. You're going to be moving paragraphs around. You're not going to get it all at the same time. I had a rabbi who once told me one of the most wonderful things that I had taught her was to have the confidence to move whole paragraphs around and try it out. And if it doesn't work, you put it back. Or if it does work, you say, okay, I'm glad I tried it. So much of what I do, Daniel, is helping to build the confidence of the rabbis that I work with. I think they come in thinking, as you said, they should know it all because that expectation is put on them. And they feel a little bit less than. I'm talking about younger rabbis. And also, I have a senior rabbi who said she still got the trauma inside from a professor in school who said, you're not very good at this. So how do you undo that? And that's part of my job too, is me saying, of course you can do this. I know you can do this. You're a soulful, smart human being. You can do this. And we're going to get you out of that mindset and get you into a more confident mindset. I had a rabbi I worked with whose desk faced the wall. And so we would talk and I said, what are you looking, if you're not looking at me, because I could see it in the back. I said, so where do you face? And she said, oh, I just put my desk in a corner. And I said, nobody puts baby in the corner. Quoting from Dirty Dancing. And I said, okay, this is what you're doing this weekend. You're rearranging your whole office. You're going to turn your desk around. You're going to face the door. You're going to claim that space too. And you have all these beautiful bookcases. Put that behind you. Stick your desk right in the middle of your room and look out. And when I saw her again 2 weeks later, she said, I changed my whole life. This is so incredible. I feel so different. And I said, that's right. She said, I feel like I got the world in front of me. And I said, that's right, you do.
Yeah. I remember last year when I read your article in the Times. So I was curious about what some of the comments were. I don't know if you read the comments.
So here's the thing. I didn't read the comments. Some of my friends did. And I know that one of the comments, she was in the advertising business, like how can she? To which I say, Charles Dickens sold, I believe, insurance before he was a full-time writer. So we all have to start somewhere. And that was a part of my life. And I did it for a short time, but I'm not apologizing for it because it becomes a part of a writer. When you write, everything you write becomes part of a writer's life, right? You learn something. I learned a ton.
I personally, I thought that your background in advertising is a boon to this because it's customer facing. A lot of people, you get inside your own head and you don't realize that it's audience first. It's customer first.
Absolutely. And I am very good at seeing a lot in a small amount of space. There's just so much real estate you have on the page. And so for me, I know there is a long ago tradition of my rabbi, may he rest in peace, when I was a little girl, would come up to the lectern and take off his glasses, and that meant the sermon is coming. And he would just go on and on and on. And I didn't understand half of it. And it wasn't because it was from a particular rabbinic point of view, it just kept going. And so for me, I find that the most impactful sermons are 20 minutes or less. I'll give you 22 if it's a really big thing if it's a really important statement that you're making. But I work with some of the most incredible senior rabbis in the country, and 20 minutes works fine for them. So a rabbi that goes on a little bit longer, I will tell you that there are 1 or 2 clients that I no longer work with because they didn't agree with me just about the length. I had a rabbi once say to me, this is my chance. I want to get it all in. And I say, yeah, you can do that in 20 minutes. You can even do it in 16, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
And we do.
I have to tell you, 20 minutes sounds very long.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and it's not about attention space. It really isn't. It's because I think it's a little self-indulgent to stand up there for 45 minutes and just keep droshing on. And it's sort of, if at a certain time, at a certain point, is it really necessary? I don't think so.
Yeah. So one of the comments that, this is just going back a moment, was that some idiot wrote something like, Chat GPT is coming for her job.
Yes, I heard about that. No, go ahead. What did you think when you read?
So I actually turned it into a LinkedIn post, which I thought was so ridiculous, because based on what you're saying, and which I understood to be the case, you are helping rabbis come out of their shell. You're helping them. It's not just about the writing. It's really about turning them into a speaker, into bringing out their inner leader from the pulpit.
I like that. I like when you say bringing out their inner leader. And I think that's true. And again, it comes back to also the claiming the space, that reminding them that they're the rabbi. Whatever they say, people are going to believe and take to heart. And so when they understand that, it helps build their confidence too. I'm not really worried about that claiming my job. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I've actually had rabbis write great sermons about that. And I think there was a great use. There are many great uses for it, but it's not for a soulful piece of writing that connects you to your congregation. There's also I encourage my rabbis to write things that come from their heart and that they think that not only the congregants are going to think about in that moment, but remember. And I think that's the difference between sometimes a high holy day drash, a high holy day sermon, and a Friday night drash, that the stakes are a little bit higher. And so I think about that a lot.
Yeah. What are the stakes?
Oh, you mean for the high holy days?
Yeah.
Well, they talk to more congregants than they ever do. I think congregants come with an open mind to hear them. I think it's about setting. I've always believed that it's about setting up for the new year. It's a reset, right? That's what the high holy days do with us. I don't want to say for us, it's with us. But the high holy days give us a reset. What are we going to do differently? I mean, that's the part of repenting, right? Teshuva, making teshuva is you repent. But part of it is you're not going to, you say that you won't do that you did again, that you are repenting for. And so for me, this is my time, September, October. It's a gorgeous time of the year. The seasons are changing in such a way that you're letting go and new things are coming into, the world, school starting, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a reset. And I think most congregants come with that in mind. And not only that, I think they believe. Not only that, I think that they come in saying, okay, I'm here. It's a little bit of a dare too. I'm here. What do you want me to think about for the next year? I may not show up for a year. Or you may get me in every, a couple more Friday nights. But I think that rabbis have the opportunity to make people think in a way they don't always give themselves the time to think about throughout the rest of the year, if they only come for those couple of times. And it's a really moving time for a rabbi to connect.
And do you feel that they're, or maybe do they feel that they're judged on the basis of these types of sermons, career-wise?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's hard. It's not fair to be judged based on 1-2 sermons. No, I don't think that it's fair. But yes, because by sheer numbers, right? There's just more people, and more people giving opinions. I liked it. I didn't like it. It was great. I once had a rabbi call me up and say, "Look, I got to tell you what happened." This was in January, after she. It was in January after she'd given the sermon, of course. And she said, a rabbi came up to me, a congregant came up to me and said, I was thinking the other day about what you said on Rosh Hashanah, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I think, okay. And she was so happy. And I said to myself, good for you. Good for you. Yeah, I was really happy about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the other signals to you of success with the sermon, besides people coming up and telling you that, relating back to you that it impacted them beyond the actual sermon itself?
I cry a lot during the rehearsals, I have to admit, and it's not out of exhaustion. It's because they're so moving. I think the rabbis I work with write some incredible sermons. I think they are covering some topics. I hate to say that they're topics, but I think they're covering issues and feelings in the Jewish community that are really hard. And I think they give hope and comfort, which I think is part of the High Holy Day message too, especially in these times. Because if you see someone up in front of you who is passionate about what they're saying, you will take it in. Most people will take that kind of message in and say, wow, I need to think about that. And so I know when a rabbi is moved. I know when a rabbi feels really good about giving a sermon, because I ask them at the beginning of every session. I'll say, how do you feel about this? And they'll say, oh, you know what, the last third. And I was like, yeah, I'll say to them, yeah, that last third. What do we got? We need to look at that. Let's look at the flow. Let's look about how that's working. Is there something that's tripping you up? Is there an idea that you don't feel that you've fully explored? The biggest thing that one of the things that I do is I ask a lot of questions when we work together. Our first sessions are brainstorming sessions, and then we go into the writing. And I'll frequently ask a rabbi to write me 3 different openings. And for a first-time rabbi with me, they'll say 3. I said, yeah, the first one is write it the way you would just off the cuff write it a Friday night, the voice that you are comfortable with. A little bit different, a little bit riskier. You haven't really started with a particular kind of story. Maybe you start with the parsha in the beginning with you, but now you're going to tell a story. And then I said, the third one, if you have the time, if you could give me a third opening, and the voice is a voice that you've always wanted to embody, but you didn't think you had the guts to continue it for a whole sermon. And I will tell you, it always works that we end up with a combo of the second and the third. We never end up with the first voice. And that's what my job is to help a rabbi find their voice and project it out into the universe, to their congregation, out from their heart, and move some people.
Hey there, fellow podcast listeners. Are you enjoying the show so far? I hope you're finding value in all the insightful conversations coming your way, and I'm grateful for all the time we get to spend together. Now, I have a small favor to ask, one that can make a big difference. Your feedback is invaluable to me. By taking a moment to rate and review this podcast, you're not only showing your support, but also helping it reach new heights. Picture this: more reviews means more visibility. More visibility means more incredible guests lining up to share their stories and expertise with you. So, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, how about making some magic happen? Scroll down, tap that rating, jot down a few words. It's that simple. Your action today can pave the way for even greater experiences tomorrow. Thanks for your support. Now let's get back to the program.
Because for me, part of these sermons have to include an action. And people say, they don't need an action, come on. And I'm like, no, actually they do. They need, it's not just about, tell me, Rabbi, what could I be thinking about this year? It's like, what could I be doing differently? And to me, that also speaks to the High Holy Day message.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, I coached an assistant rabbi at the Reform Temple with his High Holy sermon. One thing that I wanted to have him do was to, like you mentioned in the article, that there was, the one thing missing from the sermon was him. It was great. It made a lot of points. It was very impactful.
Yeah,
the theme was, how do you forgive people who don't show any remorse? Which I thought was an incredible topic. Really, there's got to be some.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah, somebody's feeling that, that they need to let go of someone who's not showing any remorse to them. But I would have loved to hear a personal anecdote or something like that. And he was somewhat resistant to that. He said, I don't think I can do it on the high holidays. Maybe I need to warm up to it or something. But it just doesn't feel like I don't think I can do it. And, I felt bad because I knew how impactful it would be. But, so relating this back to you, are rabbis resistant to sharing parts of themselves?
Yes.
The vulnerable, intimate with the congregation, especially, intimate in front of 1,000 people.
Yes. And I have a rabbi right now who doesn't feel that she belongs in the sermon. Someone new that I'm working with. And, it takes time. And that's the other thing is this is a process that you can't just do it in one set. People say, well, I'll give you, can we do it in 2 sessions? Like, no, this is a big deal. What you're doing and you deserve the time. You deserve this time to hone what you do. I really feel for you. Because it's not easy when someone doesn't want to put themselves in. I think it's partly a lack of confidence. It's the fear of being judged. And it's also the fear of letting too much out. But I think what I do in these situations is like push. I will say, you're still not in here, and I'm up there, and you're up there, and I want to know you better. You're my rabbi. And so a rabbi will say, well, yeah, but you don't need to know about me. And I'll say, I don't need to know everything about you. I don't want you to feel exposed. That's not the point. The point is just to tell a story where someone in the congregation gets to say, I did the same thing. I feel the same way. And that's connection, right? When we go to a play, a movie, even when you're in a congregation listening to a sermon and you laugh, that's a connection. Somebody's laughing because they're saying to themselves, God, I did the same thing. I know exactly how you feel. And I think when a rabbi connects to their congregation, it's really wonderful. And I think congregants want that. I think not every congregant. Remember, what I'm saying doesn't apply to everybody, but I think people who are invested in your congregation want to feel some connection to you. As a rabbi.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think it's somewhat of an old school mentality. I think that you need to be the sage on the stage. You need to show that facade of perfection, and that if people see you flawed, then maybe you're not the best leader.
100%. I think you're absolutely right, and I think that it is old school, and I think rabbis who believe that do themselves a great injustice, because I think that they feel they have to be a certain way instead of being themselves.
Yeah. I always liken it to, who would you prefer to lead you out of the trenches? Someone who's never been in there, or someone who's been in the trenches and knows the way out. So
I love that. Yeah, 100%. I agree.
And so how do you shift their mindset? Because it's a tough mindset to adopt, that to start sharing and opening up and being more vulnerable, knowing that it's so powerful and connecting. Do you give them examples where you maybe, point to other rabbis and say, well, if that rabbi can do it, do you have certain things that you can show them to help them?
I do. And they happen really organically. I had a rabbi at a congregation who had been an associate rabbi, very large congregation. And she had been tasked with writing the sermon for Yisker. And she said, Michelle, this is the first meeting. She said, I got nothing. I usually come to you and I've got some notes and I've read some books. And very frequently when we start working, they've been reading for months beforehand, and some don't. And some say, look, what are you thinking about, Michelle? I just read this article, and can we talk about that? But she said, I don't have anything. And I said, okay. How do you feel about giving the sermon for Yisker? And she said, bad. I said, okay. She said, I don't feel right. I said, you don't feel like you're entitled to give the sermon? Yes, I do not feel that I am entitled. I said, okay. And I'm older than she is, and I've been around a little bit longer. So I remember when I was young, we had been taught that you never said Kaddish unless it was for your parents. And there was a superstition around it as well that, just wasn't a good thing to do. So I said, I'm sorry?
You could kill them if you say Kaddish.
Yeah, I don't want to say that even out loud, right? So I said to her, so can I ask you something? She said, yes. I said, are your parents alive? And she said, uh-huh. I said, okay. I said, so maybe, I'm just guessing, that part of the reason you don't feel entitled to give the sermon for Yisker is because your parents are alive. And she said, yes, that's it. That's it. And I said, okay, I get it. I really, really get it. I said, so, and I'm thinking. I said, have you ever lost anyone who you loved dearly? She thought. She said, of course. I lost my mentor. Before I was a rabbi, I was a lawyer. And my mentor died. And I loved him dearly. He was wonderful. I said, well, when did that happen? She said, about 11 months ago. I said, so do you think you could write a sermon feeling what you feel for that loss and share that with your congregation? And she got all choked up. And I said, I think you could, don't you? And she said, yeah. She went on to write such a beautiful sermon. It was so incredibly moving. She invited the widow of her mentor. She invited all of her classmates who had all been mourning with him. And so it was so how, you asked me, how do I know when a rabbi's happy with a sermon, when a sermon is not successful, but it has meaning. It's like when it becomes something that is beyond what a rabbi imagined, just like it's beyond, my coaching is beyond my practice, beyond what I imagined. When you put yourself out there and you tell a story, and she told the story about losing this man who meant so much to her. Such a vulnerable place to be, right? Knowing even there were people in the congregation who thought, but he's not your parent. But believe me, nobody thought that at the end of that sermon. It goes back to, Daniel, what you were saying about being entitled to say a certain thing that some rabbis don't feel that they can claim that space yet. And it's just a matter of asking the right question. I don't know if they're the right questions, but asking the question. I liken it to putting a key in a lock. Keep trying keys. And I had another rabbi that I worked with way early in my practice. And whenever he would speak, that he'd get this vein in his forehead, and it was not. It was really off-putting,
distracting. Yeah.
Very distracting. Thank you. And I knew that I wanted to figure out how to say something. I had to figure out what to say to get him to relax at a certain point. And so he had written this, we had worked together on a sermon, and he got up, we were rehearsing, and this was in person. I rehearse people because I work all over the country. I have people, turn their cameras on, have their executive directors turn their camera on, and we work that way. And then we talk, but I was able to do this because I work in person in the New York area. And And he got up there and he started to speak this wonderful sermon that he had written. And there it was. I said, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I said, try it again. And this time, say it as if you're saying it to your son or your wife. Say it with that kind. Nope, didn't work. He did it. Up came that affect. And then I'm thinking, oh my goodness. And then he said to me, I wish I had a teleprompter. And I said, why? He said, well, because I have a teleprompter. I could see it right in front of me. And I said, first of all, nobody works the teleprompter. And second of all, can you read what you're seeing in front of you? I mean, did you bump up the type on your sermon? And he said, yeah, it's 14-point type. I said, so you can read it. And he said, yeah. I said, so why are you telling yourself you can't read it? And he said, oh, no, I can read it. I said, okay, great. You can read it, right? Right. Do it again. It was gone. He never, ever did it ever again. That vein in his forehead, we never saw it again.
No, you really are the rabbi whisperer.
But it's just about, Daniel, it's really, and this, it's just about asking the question that maybe somebody else doesn't have the time to ask or doesn't have the experience to sit there. As I said, I've watched directors work with, and now I direct some work for my own work. And you have to have patience too. And you have to have the time. You can't rush certain things. There are clocks. Yeah. Okay. I got October 2. I could tell you when Rosh Hashanah is for the next 10 years because I've got those clocks working. And, but sometimes I tell my rabbis, if you just give yourself the time and you give me a little time too, it's amazing what you can unlock.
Yeah. It's not just like a quick fix.
No, and it's not even right. And it's not even a fix. It's sort of like we can get rid of that. We can get rid of the fact that your parents are still alive and you can still give her a gorgeous Yizkor service. We can get rid of that. You don't need a teleprompter. It's these expectations or these enormous pressures that rabbis really don't make up. They're in our tradition, right? I mean, we've been around for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I'll tell you another thing I do is I ask my rabbis to put commentary from women in their sermons. And I never get pushback, ever. And part of that is because, we got a lot of, we have half the population of brilliant thinkers, but it's just half. It's just the men. And I think that women's voices as commentators, as sages, belong in these sermons.
Yeah.
And that's very much about me and how I view the world. So I claim that.
Amazing. I remember I was an interim rabbi at one of the synagogues over here, and I landed on my feet. It was right before Rosh Hashanah. And it was such a crazy time, that marathon. And it was, I think I spoke 7 times in 10 days. And it was absolutely madness.
It's hard. It's super, super hard.
Yeah. And wanting to hit a home run with every one of them because it's that season. And I remember when Yizkor came around, I had that same feeling that you were describing. Like, I have nothing. I could not, and I didn't sleep the night before. And the morning of, I walked out of the synagogue. I got down from the stage there, and I was walking up and down the block. And I'm like, I have to speak in an hour. And I don't feel that anything that I have to say is worth these people's time. And it was the most horrible, empty feeling. Oh. And
what happened?
So I basically made that the sermon. So a little bit of background is that my dad had passed away the year before. So the year before, I was not the rabbi, and I was outside the room for a Yizkor. And this was my very first Yizkor.
Oh.
So I was able to...
sermon.
Yeah. And I said, I've never had to do this before. And I've never, I quoted the line from Mike Tyson. I said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, and I don't have a plan. I thought maybe I had something to say this morning and I don't, so I said, I'm just going to share two thoughts that I had as my dad was being buried. And I said, there were two sounds that when you hear, there's no sound like that. There's the sound of the kriya. That was the second sound. The tearing, which is so close to your ear when you hear that thread rip, and the first clod of earth on the casket. And so I spoke about that and the meaning behind the tearing, and
Gorgeous.
It worked. But
it worked, and it was deeply personal.
Yeah, and it was, and so that you could not have just thought of that. There must have been more preparation. There really wasn't. And and I threw in a little joke there about, I said, I wish my dad had been alive to see me, he always wanted me to be rabbi. And, he said, Dad, well, I'm the interim rabbi. I'm not actually the rabbi. I'm the interim rabbi, and it was cute. It was fun. It was, it was touching. It was short. It was funny. It was, it worked, but you have to dig deep. You really have to dig deep for those types of situations. And so I want to segue into.
I'll say one thing. I would have told you that's a brilliant sermon. I would have told you that every person in that room had the same moment you did of being there for the first time.
Right.
And
that never occurred to me.
And I would also tell you that you had spent your life in part preparing for this sermon because you have been a son. And you will always be a son. And the love that you felt over your lifetime is what empowered you to give this sermon. And so I would say you were right where you needed to be in front of the people. The universe spoke to you and said, you got this. And you gave the sermon you were supposed to give.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes you don't realize it until after, hindsight. Yeah,
and I'm sure they all really responded.
It was nice. There's a joke. I don't know if you ever heard this joke, but it's kind of a cute joke about there's this family that converts, and as they're coming out of the mikvah, so the rabbi congratulates them and welcomes them to the Jewish faith and says, I think it's wonderful that you guys did this. I just have one question. I'm just curious. And I said, what? And I said, why did you convert 1 week before Passover? Right? So I was like, why did you become the rabbi right at Rosh Hashanah?
That's a lot.
Such a massive amount of work. The shofar and the coordination of it and speaking. And it was just, but it was, it was the best of times.
One of the things I do now also during the High Holy Days is many of the congregations that I work with have multiple rabbis, multiple cantors. Not all. I work with a very small, congregation, the rabbi in a very small congregation in New England, and it's just her and a cantor. But where there are multiple clergy on the bima, what I also do is I coach them as a group. And we talk about what I'll say vibe is between them and how they send that out. The Reformed tradition is very different from the conservative or an Orthodox. There is more of a give and take during the liturgical parts of the service, right? There is more when you Reform. There's more leading and there's more response. But I think that what you send out as a group, it's like watching an amazing orchestra play. When they're connected. I remember seeing Yo-Yo Ma and Silk Ensemble at Lincoln Center. And those people were connected because they looked at each other. They could feel each other. They could even touch each other at times to say, yes, that's great. And so, or yes, I feel what you're feeling. And so putting that out there, and I love working that way too, going through, these services are long. These services are enormous. And so, and often they're bringing someone new in for the first time, right? There's the first, there's the rabbinic intern, there's a cantorial intern. And so I love doing that too, but I cut you off. I'm sorry.
I don't remember, but I know I wanted to ask you about notes because you're a playwright and you coach actors. and to read your work, and eventually the idea is to lose the paper. And these, for the most part, there's either not enough time in their schedule to memorize it, and so how do you, is the gold standard to do it without the notes, or do you try to have them?
Never, actually. And here's why. When you're coaching an actor, when you're working with an actor, when I watch my director, then I'm working with the director I'm working with now, coaching, because I'm here in New Hampshire working on a musical. And when we're working on a show, something that I've written, that's the primary job for that actor, is learning those lines, being part of the process of putting it all up there. A rabbi's got 10,000 things going on in their lives, and they're all part of the job. And you cannot let a sermon take precedence over the pastoral. You cannot let, it's just, that's one part of what they do. And so I think it would be really, I know some rabbis who can memorize, very few, but some who do. So I never fault a rabbi for using notes, and encourage those who want to use them. What I really I try to do with most of the folks that I work with is to get them off the sermon, so that they're not down here, and that they are taking the time to connect and look out. And so that is a matter of having the sermon finished ahead of time, so that they can rehearse once, twice, 3 times in the space. It's not enough to just say it to yourself. It's like, you got to get up. I used to, in the beginning, I'd make them put their robes on when we rehearsed. I don't do that anymore. They're very grateful for that. But you got to get up and get into the space and hear how you sound, hear what it's like, turn the camera on. One of the things that has been so helpful to my coaching process are right when I started coaching, and in part, Daniel, I think for some congregations, why they hired me was because they were doing these hybrid services now that they had never done before. All of a sudden now, rabbis were in the position of not just speaking to their congregants, but speaking to a camera.
Yeah.
So the way that actually spun out and worked was because I would say 90% of the cameras that were put in happened before COVID. So that many times, a lot of these temples, these synagogues, were ready for the COVID, for what they had to do, and turn on a dime and put the cameras on, so they could keep their congregants in with them on a Friday night, on a Saturday morning. It was crazy timing. But
yeah.
No, I know of another rabbi who doesn't use notes. I think sometimes that when you don't have notes, you're speaking in front of a large group that you're not used to speaking in front of, that you can sort of forget points that you want to make. You end up repeating things that you want. Make it easy. This is hard. This is really hard. Make it easy. Write the notes, but rehearse enough. Get yourself up in your sanctuary enough. I talk about language being in your DNA. The more you say this out loud, the more it's going to be in your DNA, the more comfortable you're going to feel about looking down, checking a note, and then speaking up. I will also tell them on this particular, line, make sure you say it out there. Make sure, and so they'll take a note to do that. And they know why. They just have to write it down.
Yeah.
Make sure on this one, I'm
yeah. There's I call it a mouth memory. There's certain, you need to articulate it a couple times so that your mouth knows how to say it.
Absolutely. I think that's great. Absolutely.
It's it's funny. I spoke recently, and it was a funny situation where it was a blended family. It was a bar mitzvah, and so there was a divorce in the family, and they wanted to. One of the parties wanted to talk about one of the relatives looking down, who had been deceased and looking down very proud. The other side of the family actually didn't like this relative. So I
one who died. They didn't like the one who had died.
Guys, he's like that guy's a momser. Like, So the funny thing is that I as a little bit of a joke, I said, well, how about we compromise? Instead of saying looking down, let's say looking up. That was just, but and we had a good laugh over it. But once I had said it, I was so nervous that I was actually going to say
Gonna
it.
say it.
So I had to, over and over, I said, looking down, looking down, looking down. I was so, once it came out of my mouth once, I was nervous that I was going to say it
I
again.
get it. I totally
Yeah.
get it. Of course.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I
No.
want to talk about this year, because this year very much different than last year. I remember David Wolpe saying that Israel was always a charged topic to talk about, and everything has changed, in this year. And so what are people? I know it's on everyone's minds, but how are rabbis approaching it? How are you helping them approach it, navigate? Because there's so many aspects of it that are just larger than they've ever been.
I think this year, in my experience, in my thinking, in years past, I think Israel was a topic that was highly political for a congregation. Not the whole, you would find very few congregations where everybody thought the same thing. I think Israel's become an existential question now. And it's something that everyone is thinking about. I think in years past, a couple of people thought about it, maybe even a lot of people in a congregation. But because of the war, because of what's going on in Gaza, because of all the deaths in Gaza, because of the 6 hostages' bodies who were just, who just came back, there's a lot of, it's just more complicated this year. And you're going to have generations of Jewish families sitting in their sanctuaries, and the grandmother is not talking to her teenage granddaughter or grandson, college age grandchild, and vice versa. And it's a very tough time. When I started my coaching practice this year, what I was most interested in about is what is the future of Judaism in America? And what does that look like? How do we answer that question? And sometimes that was a question that I brought up to start a brainstorming session. You have the anti-Semitism. Rabbis would come and say, this year I want to do the Israel sermon, and I want to preach about loneliness, and I want to preach about, and they would, I want to preach about what's going on in my community. I want to preach about loneliness. I want to preach about, and so the idea of a sermon about anti-Semitism and a sermon about Israel were really separate in years past. And this year they're not. They're really connected. There may be a thin connection if most of the sermon is about Israel and the feelings about Israel and the feelings a rabbi want a congregation to have about Israel, but they will touch on the anti-Semitism that people are feeling or reading about. I have rabbis who say my congregants don't feel it here. There are no acts of anti-Semitism that are happening in our community, but they read about it, and that's what makes them frightened. I think that this year there are rabbis who are talking about fear in ways that they never have before. So there are a bunch of firsts this year, and not every sermon, and I tell this to my rabbis too. And when I say my rabbis, the ones that I work with, they're not mine, but I take them to my heart. But not every sermon this year is going to be about Israel and anti-Semitism, right? There are other things that are going on in people's minds that they know that they need to talk about. And they understand, of course they understand that. But I do believe that this year, pretty much every congregation that I know I'm working with is going to hit those sermons at one time or another, these high holy days. I don't think that I think that might be a first. I'm not exactly sure, but it feels very much like a first.
Sure. Is there fatigue? Are people just...
So that's a really, really good question. And what we're hearing back is not on a dime. No way. There is no fatigue at all. Because you just have to look at the newspaper. Are people concerned enough that they sometimes have to turn it off? Yeah, they're human. We're all human. Sometimes it's like, I can't read that one. I'll get, but I will read it tomorrow. I'll save it and I'll read it tomorrow. Sometimes, the word is so so broken right now. The world is also really wonderful right now. And so it's about balance, at least in my life, or at least trying to balance. I think that's the hard thing, trying to balance it.
Can maybe you describe an ideal client for yourself? Someone might be interested in working with you.
I love that you asked me this question. I'll tell you why. I sometimes get phone calls from boards of directors. And I once had a board of director, a person who was the chair of the board of a temple in California. She didn't tell me, she didn't want to tell me too much about herself, but it's really easy. Give me your name and I can look it up. And she said, my rabbi really needs help. I really think you could be really good for our rabbi. He's been here for a while and he's just not connecting to the congregation. And I said, I'm really sorry you're having, difficulty with the rabbi. She said, yes. So can you call our rabbi? Can you? And I said, listen, the ask has to come from the rabbi, nobody else, because they have to be ready to do this work or at least explore it, or at least have a conversation. She said, oh, okay. No, I understand. Okay. And so about 3 months later, I got back to her and I said, whatever happened with the rabbi? Then didn't hear from her. So I looked on their website, and the rabbi that she had referenced, he was gone.
Wow.
And so the ideal candidate for me is someone who wants to do this work. I got a text this week from a rabbi who said, do you have time for me, in your roster? And it's sort of like, not really, but she had been recommended by someone who I wanted to respect. And so I said, yes, why don't you let's talk, and never got back to me. I have consultations with phone calls that go on for an hour. Now I have to cut them shorter because they go on. I really want to work with you, but I don't think I have the time. And they've reached out to me. So, and then I never hear from them. It doesn't happen a lot. Sorry about that. It really doesn't. The balance of my work is I had a rabbi who said, I've had your card on my desk for 6 months. Here I am. Can we talk? And it's like, yeah, you're ready. Let's talk. And not everybody is ready when they think they're ready. But the idea that they are ready to explore their storytelling, explore their work on their sermons. I work with great people who are super successful and just want to become more so. So for me, the ideal client is someone who doesn't come in as a skeptic, although I do have those and I usually convert them, but is ready to doesn't have to be a lot of time. I'm not asking for hours and hours, but what I am asking for is openness and someone who is open to changing up their process. So instead of starting on Thursday night on the Friday night sermon, I'm actually going to talk you into starting on Monday, but just working for 20 minutes, doing things like that. And so people who are open, that's my ideal client, my ideal clients. And
that's great. I hope you find lots of them. You are clearly an expert at what you do. And it's so fun to talk to you. And
I'm really happy to have this conversation. Thank you so much for this. It's really lovely to talk to you. I hope we keep in touch. Okay.
So tell us where we can find your service.
Oh my goodness, of course. Yeah. So my name is Michelle Lowe. I am my website is Michelle Lowe. It's MICHELELOWE.net, and I am thrilled to do this work. I love doing this work. I'm a playwright. I don't know when you're going to be putting this out there, but I've got a developmental production of my new musical, Split, that is happening September 5 through 8 in New London, New Hampshire. And
congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. And I wish everyone of your listeners a happy and a healthy and a peaceful holiday.
Thank you. Okay, take care, Michelle.
You too, Daniel. Be well.
You've been listening to The Maggid Method, and I'm Daniel Steinberg. Learn more about the Maggid Method at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.